In one of your speeches, you said that children should be pampered. What did you mean, and what do you think the word pamper means? Thank you. If to be more precise, children can be pampered, but children cannot be indulged. Pamper, what does it mean? Anticipate the child's desires and satisfy them. Not all desires, however, but those that contribute to his personal development. Then the child grows up, and the childhood memory of how he was pampered remains. This contributes to the fact that there will be no generational conflicts in the family. And furthermore, it is the teaching of the child by the manifestation of a beneficent initiative in relation to others. And if you look at the future prospects of life, each person is fated to old age if he lives more or less correctly. And when he gets old, he will need to be taken care of. And it is desirable that he does not beg from children, and the children themselves are able to see his needs, that they could in advance take the initiative to satisfy them. And in order for them to develop such a skill, children must be pampered, but not indulged. That is, you should ignore all the caprices on the theme I want, I want, I want, I want, simply for the simple reason that the child is not capable of independent life. The brain structures that allow thinking correctly are not developed. There is no life experience which allows him to evaluate his wishes and consequences of their satisfaction. Well, and among other things, many wishes, they are from the field of consumerism. I want one thing today, and tomorrow I want something else. As a result, a mountain of toys and a bored child. It shouldn't be like that. But if you pamper correctly, then everything will be fine. In a number of works of the internal predictor of the USSR, the presence of different level objective laws is indicated: governorial, species-specific, noospheric, the violation of which leads to crises. Are there certain universal objective laws of the highest priorities? For example, does the wording "evil comes back like a boomerang" reflect such an objective law? Firstly, the objective laws are classified according to those spheres where they appear. Evil returns like a boomerang. This is one of the objective laws, nravious ethical in their essence, belonging to the group of noospheric religious objective laws that regulate the interrelationship of the carriers of reason. They form pravious ethics and unpravious ethics. Evil and its manifestations are unpravious ethics. Therefore, there are no universal objective laws. They don't exist. They don't exist because creation is structured, organized in a certain way, and all the objective laws that exist are manifested in these or those spheres of activity. Yes, they are in life. Yes, they are interconnected, mutually penetrate each other. Physical and chemical objective laws determine the biosphere of the Earth. and therefore biospheric objective laws are based on them and are subordinate to them. But nevertheless, objective laws manifest themselves in certain spheres of life, and those objective laws that operate in one sphere do not at all necessarily operate in another. The universal objective law, it is multi-aspected. It is the predetermination of the being of this creation by God. But it's unlikely that this is cognizable by a person by force of the limitedness of his capabilities. I am a mathematician by education with over 30 years of experience in running a business. I read with interest and enthusiasm, and I hope I have mastered the sufficiently general theory of governance and other materials of the conception of social safety. Don't you find that, for the sake of strategy, there were and are tactical defeats, the total mass of which can seriously tip the conception of social safety boat to the point of impossibility of implementing the conception in society? It could be softer in the materials with the role of people of a certain nationality in society. Result: a number of books are banned by reason of their anti-Semitism. Well, first of all, there is no anti-Semitism. They are banned for other reasons. Russian law enforcement practice, it does not imply coincidence of answers to two different questions. Why and how to juridically form it. In the materials of the conception, there is no racism, no anti-Semitism, no great Russian or some other nationalism. There is no principle of Satanism, we are better than others, therefore we have the right. Therefore, the fact that some materials ended up on the federal list of extremist materials, this is not the trouble of the conception. It is the trouble of those who created this federal list and who supplement it. It could have been softer in the evaluations of the Orthodox Church of the type, slaves obey your masters. And what? In the teaching of the Orthodox Church, there is no thesis, slaves obey your masters? After all, there is no other sociology there. The words of Christ in the prayer Our Father, Thy kingdom come, Thy will be done on earth as in heaven, is qualified by all churches in the name of Christ as heresy, the name of which is Chiliasm millenarianism. It might have been necessary not to ignore Pyakin and his, according to Zasnoben's marked evaluation, high-frequency, essentially intense tactical activity. The result, the emerging split between the strong tactician Pyakin and the current composition of the internal predictor of the USSR. Strategy without tactics is not always a slow path to victory. Sometimes power is not enough. Thank you. Well, tactics are tactics, but where are the tactical results of the great tactician? There are none. Moreover, after 2018, Valery Viktorovich Pyakin, unfortunately, is operating contrary to the ideals of the conception of social safety. It is impossible to say that he precisely undermines it, but nonetheless, as a result of his activities, circulation and demand for the books have not grown. That is, the calls, read thick books, they remain unanswered. Although there are 100,000 likes within a few days after each issue of questions and answers. Therefore, there is the conception as such, but perhaps in some aspects, its presentation by us is not perfect, leaves much to be desired. Yes, there are themes that are not covered, But there is society as it is. I have already said that the majority in society does not have interests that go beyond personal self-satisfaction, family household, and certain professional interests, which are the basis for satisfying the interests of the first two groups. And if there are no other interests, then the conception and tasks of personal development, they are not relevant for these people. Nobody can wish in their place to master the materials of the conception, to develop personally, if they themselves do not wish it. But, nevertheless, everyone who comes across the materials of the conception can relate to them as he sees fit. For someone it is nonsense, sectarianism, but for someone it is an incentive for personal development and help in solving his problems, both personal and social. Because if we don't fall into agnosticism, that is, the doctrine of the uncognizability of the world, then there exist objective laws. If we, both individually and collectively, violate them, then society suffers some kind of damage up to death. If we build our politics and our personal life relying on them, then they support us. And the conception of social safety in general is not a collection of texts that is necessary to cram, memorize, and guide oneself by them. But it is simply a hint that you need to sense life and comprehend it. Objective laws exist, cognize them, build life in accordance with them. For someone, a few words are enough for this, which will push him to development. Someone needs help in the form of supporting texts, having read which and correlating them with life. He could continue and move further on his own. Well, and someone just needs an emotional boost. And these are those who massively write comments, "Oh, what would we do without you? May you take care of yourself. Hi, thanks and a deep bow. Hi, something else." But this has nothing to do with the conception of social safety. Because it is necessary to personally develop and help others in personal development. Nobody can be pulled by the ears or made to fly some path with an inspiring kick in the backside. Well, again with the root problem of the current civilization. There is nothing ingenious in the fact that everywhere and many times people have the idea to place something imaginary, endowed with all the dominant qualities in their unlimited expression, in the vacant place of superdominance. As soon as you do it, the hierarchy becomes, as it were, subdominance of the hierarch, his jretzes. They are their mighty defenders from the rest of the herd. This is a quote from Labuz, This Crazy, Crazy World Through the Eyes of Zoopsychologists. Such a relation towards God as a superdominant, which protects the pravious, the subdominant, from villains, lowers a person into the animal type of psyche structure. How to remain human if the difference in subservience to God and to a leader is not visible? Well, indeed, there is a God that is. And there are fantasies of people on the theme of what God should be for them to be comfortable. But God who is, He really is the Almighty. He gives proofs of His being to each and every one, and they are expressed in the fact that God answers in accordance with the meaning of innermost prayers by changing the flow of life circumstances, or somehow makes it clear as to why this or that request cannot be fulfilled. But people have different relations towards this. There are those who consider this to be random coincidences, without pondering on the fact that these random coincidences are obviously ethically conditioned and really support some types of nraviousness and ethics and hinder the activities of carriers of other types of nraviousness and ethics. And in general, God never demanded subservience and humiliation from a person. He always offered a person His love and waited for the reciprocal love from the person, and a person's life in dialogue with Him. Therefore, true religiosity, it never humiliated a person, but various kinds of cults of gods invented by people. They expressed non-human types of psyche structure and always hindered the formation of a person into a human, demanding servility, worship, dogmatic discipline, rejection of sophist, and the substitution of sophist by one or another commandment. This is indeed the root problem of humanity and the overwhelming majority of people, since it is precisely from this problem that all other problems grow. And if this problem is liquidated, then as a consequence, all other problems will disappear. How to forgive my parents who suppressed my will as a child, as a result of which I got some chronic diseases. I was pushed into a profession which makes me sick. And in general, I, with all my interests and pursuits, am not interesting to them, but most important for them, to plant potatoes. I live with hatred for them. I understand that this is destructive. I must forgive, but now I can't. What to do? You really need to forgive. In order to forgive, you need to understand that what they did, after all, taught you something in life. Perhaps saved from some other trouble. Furthermore, it is necessary to understand that God does not impose on the soul anything beyond what is possible for her. If you cannot forgive your parents, their mistakes in your upbringing, then this is some kind of egoism, I-centrism. Really, you need to take as a given everything that happened. You have to understand that there are no people without a past, but there are people without a future. But one should not fall into the category of people without a future. And in order not to fall into it, you after all need to think about in what your parents were wrong, why they were wrong, and why they were wrong. These are most likely questions connected with the information and algorithmics of your ancestral egregor. from where your parents learn certain patterns of behavior, behavioral programs. It is necessary to rethink these programs, block their manifestations in yourself, learn to love life in general and parents in particular. Well, then forgiveness will come. You will meet your parents with gratitude because you still need to understand. If some other parents could have fulfilled their mission of upbringer in relation to your soul better than your specific real parents, then you would have been born in a different family with different parents. And so this is a given. And these are the best parents for you, for your destiny. So you need to forgive all their mistakes and love them no matter what, because one loves from the bounty of the soul and not for something. For something one respects, for something one does not respect, and for the same thing some people respect while others do not. But one loves from the bounty of the soul, even in the case when there is nothing to respect, really nothing to respect. In the sufficiently general theory of governance, it is written that the method of dynamic programming is an algorithmic expression of the sufficiently general theory of governance. The question is it possible to use this method to calculate the sequence of steps for changing the state of the Russian society as an object of governance, from the current state to a state in which 80% of Russians will have the human type of psyche structure by the time they reach adulthood? Do members of the internal predictor of the USSR use the sufficiently general theory of governance to govern projects, for example, when its representatives work at St. Petersburg State Agrarian University? If so, how do they evaluate the vector of error? Is Mikhail Viktorovich Velichko aware of successful examples of governance towards social systems with the help of the sufficiently general theory of governance? Where can you find them? Well, let us start with the method of dynamic programming. If you use it, then it is a method of formal optimization of preliminarily formalized tasks. That is, there are two circumstances here. The task itself, does it allow formalization into a method of dynamic programming as such? And do you have the sufficient skills and understanding to formalize it in such a way? Further questions will arise about what parameters describe the object of governance, whether you have sufficient computing power to pass this formal model through the method and find the optimal solution, according to which you will then have to steer, and life will bring its own prospects, its own corrections. But in the sufficiently general theory of governance, the method of dynamic programming is touched upon and considered not at all in order to use it precisely in that way as it's accepted in research operations and in applied mathematics. The method of dynamic programming, in the presentation of the sufficiently general theory of governance, is connected with the conception of the triunity of matter, information, measure, and does not at all involve there in order to exercise abstractionism, improving these or those provisions of mathematics, demonstrating examples of use precisely as formal methods of optimization and solution of governorial tasks. It was involved there in order to show the worldview and philosophical questions related to the sufficiently general theory of governance and its applications. That is, this is also the question of how to comprehend the sufficiently general theory of governance. So, the method of dynamic programming, the pictures that accompany the presentation, taken basically from the book by Paulo de la Barria, this is not for counting something. This is in order to comprehend what is behind the sufficiently general theory of governance. And further, concrete governorial tasks require their own methods of solution. And methods of solution are not always transferable from one sphere to another. Now about the use of the sufficiently general theory of governance. You see, the SGTG was born not as something provable. The SGTG appeared as a result of the descriptive method of cognizing reality. And the main concepts of the SGTG, this is the entire function of governance, stability of an object of governance in terms of predictability of behavior, methods of governance, structural, structureless, and on the basis of virtual structures, schemes of governance, program adaptive, predictor corrector, and the intellectual scheme as a version of the predictor corrector. Therefore, if a person simply solves his everyday tasks, then, for the most part, he follows the entire function of governance, even without realizing this fact. Because really, we live, something presses on our psyche, we somehow react to it, and in general we go through the whole entire function of governance. But along with this we have a whole bunch of prejudices. And these prejudices do not allow us to govern many processes in life. Well, it's generally accepted that history flows by itself, spontaneously, that governance ends at the level of conflicts between states and the attempts of transnational corporations to absorb the state into themselves. And the fact that history has been governed for the past several thousand years, governorially illiterate people believe that only psychopaths who unreasonably believe in conspiracy theories can think so. Therefore, the purpose of the SGTG is to, after all, help people to overstep these prejudices. To learn to see governance where they really did not see it before, or self-governance, and, if necessary, enter these processes in the quality of governors, organizing processes of governance, intercepting processes of governance, changing the direction of the flow of processes of self-governance. Further, about positive examples. Well, you see, we live in such a time when, well, the analytical services of the opponents have to think somehow by themselves. They are paid money for this, and there is no need to tell them who uses the SGTG and how, and what success they have achieved. You can think that this is my unwillingness to talk about it. You can also think that there are no real results and I simply cannot say anything on this question. I can say that with those who use the SGTG in their lives, in their practice, who have some problems related to their governorial tasks, this is the subject of a specific conversation, and not some advertising statement to the public. Therefore, this is how it is with this. In the SGTG, it is written, every process in creation can be interpreted, presented, considered as a process of governance or self-governance. For this reason, the conceptual and terminological apparatus has precisely the theory of governance as such. It is generalized, which allows, with its help, to uniformly describe different processes, pan-natural, biological, technical, even more so all social ones, the processes of psychic activity. The question is, why does the internal predictor of the USSR, in its works, itself not use the conceptual and terminological apparatus of the SGTG, if it allows to uniformly describe various processes, pan-natural, biological, technical, even more so all social ones, the processes of psychic activity? Well, to begin with, the schemes of information processing that are presented in the preliminary materials of the course of the SGTG are also used when considering how the psyche of man works. If this is not the use of the conceptual terminological apparatus of the SGTG when considering some concrete problems, then what is? Second, there is a book, Economics of Innovative Development. Writing it would have been impossible without the sufficiently general theory of governance. Because talking about governance towards the economy of the state, not having defined what the vector of objectives of governance is expressed in, how it is formed, not having defined what a vector of error of governance is expressed in, what is the arsenal of means of governance? Well, it is simply impossible. If there is no such determinedness, then it is impossible to talk about governance towards the economy. If you turn to technical disciplines, when it comes to governance towards aircraft, aviation terminology is used. When it comes to governance towards ships, the terminology of shipbuilding, maritime is used. If you turn to the mathematical apparatus, by means of which the task of stability in terms of predictability of behavior, both in relation to aircraft and in relation to ships, is solved, then this is in general one and the same mathematical apparatus. The differences are only in the accepted and traditional designations of the variable coefficients included in the mathematical model. And the SGTG is also in itself an abstraction, which is filled with real content in the formulation and solution of concrete practical tasks. If you use exclusively the terminology of the SGTG when solving concrete tasks, avoiding the terminology of the concretics of the corresponding field, then there will be insanity. And so the SGTG allows you to set governorial tasks in all spheres of activity on the basis of the fact that the conceptual apparatus, the subject domain as such, are correlated with the abstractions of the SGTG in a quite determined way. Therefore, the claims made by the author of this question, they are inappropriate. What do you think about the statement made that the herd-pack automatisms of humanoid apes in the behavior of adults are a consequence of the fact that at first, people themselves refuse the truth and decide to lie, and then they degrade and acquire one of the non-human types of psyche structure? I think that such a position is not right, because a person is born unprepared for an independent life, and childhood is given so that he is prepared for life. If we look at how the human organism develops, how the psyche of the personality develops, then we will see certain parallels between age stages and types of structure of the psyche. That is, the formation of types of structure of the psyche is the result of a stop in personal development or a perversion of personal development at certain stages. And further, ethnologists, zoopsychologists write that a pattern has been revealed in ethology. Strongly armed species have high innate morality. Weakly armed species have weak innate morality. And man, being a weakly armed biological species, has low innate morality. This, if I am not mistaken, is discussed in the 17th chapter of Fundamentals of Sociology. Therefore, when people begin to lie, then this is precisely a consequence of the animal type of the structure of the psyche. Because it's in adulthood when this innate morality of the herd pack monkey is realized. How does the habit of lying come about? Well, basically it is formed by the family. Because if the adults lead the child to the point that he is afraid to tell the truth, then he will lie. And the parents and upbringers, other grandfathers and grandmothers, should show strictness first of all in relation to themselves, and not towards children. Because if strictness is manifested in relation to the children, precisely as exactingness, precisely as a carrot and stick policy, then really adults form habits of hypocrisy, pretending that the person is working when he is messing around, hiding their abuses and consequences. Therefore, the biological basis is low innate herd pack morality of the species Homo sapiens. Plus, socio-cultural content, the character of upbringing in a family in the style of the stepmother of Cinderella. Cinderella, I raise you from morning to evening, but I don't make a single comment to my daughters. But where is my gratitude? Dmitry Ivanovich Mendeleev has the following words: science begins as soon as it begins to measure. What does philosophy as a science measure, and what standards does it use? Maybe it's like Protagoras says, man is the measure of all things. Or can the algorithms of his thinking and behavior be juxtaposed with the objective laws of being, taken in the quality of a standard? Or is such a question in principle incorrect for sciences of a non-technical profile? The questions of metrological consistency are considered in detail at the very beginning of the Fundamentals of Sociology in the first part. In natural sciences and its technical applications, metrological consistency is really expressed in what is measured. There are standards, kilograms, amperes, seconds, meters, and so on. The standard base is the basis for many types of activity. But such an understanding of metrological consistency is narrow. Because in the broadest sense, metrological consistency is expressed in the fact that independent from each other people, independently of each other, can correlate in a univocal way the abstraction of a certain theory with the concretics of life. If a theory describes a certain phenomenon, then looking into life, perceiving it, a person can, either with the help of a standard base or organoleptically, say whether there is a phenomenon described in the theory in life, or at the given moment it is absent. But the measurement of kilograms, meters per second, and everything else is a particular case of metrological consistency in such a broad sense. If we talk about philosophy, then philosophy, it is dual in its character in the life of society. Metaphorically, the role of philosophy can be explained as a kind of tuning fork. On the one hand, it is impossible to perform even the most primitive melody on a tuning fork. And on the other hand, if the musicians do not have perfect pitch, then the orchestra cannot be tuned without a tuning fork, and the orchestra will play like a cat's concert. And moreover, if musicians have perfect pitch, then they don't need a tuning fork either. Philosophy as a scientific discipline must be metrologically consistent in the sense that I said. Its abstractions must be univocally correlatable with life by different people independently of each other. And along with this, philosophy by itself cannot solve a single applied task. But if philosophy is false, then the entire orchestra of sciences begins to conflict with each other. And in the life of civilization, there is that jumble which we see. On the other hand, there are scientists, there are engineers who need philosophy like a hole in the head, because they have a developed sense of measure. And Protagoras, in this sense, is really right. Man is the measure of all things. Not every man, however, but one with a developed sense of measure, with a developed culture of thinking, because intellect is also one of the expressions of measure. And in this case, a person is able to express philosophy himself. Therefore, the role of philosophy is really dual. On the one hand, it is needed in order to harmonize the activities of those who do not have a developed sense of measure. On the other hand, it is not needed by those whose sense of measure is close to impeccable, and they successfully solve those tasks that they undertake, well, on the basis of their perception and understanding of reality, without any philosophical abstractions. And in relation to them, erroneous philosophies such as Marxism, Hegelianism, they have a harmful effect, since they tailor their sense of measure towards those dogmas and verbal formulations that are characteristic of these philosophies. In general, it is so. Are there examples for understanding the triunity of matter-information measure in nature or in the current culture of society? Is it possible to apply the principle of practice is the criterion of truth to test the truth of the worldview from the standpoint of the triunity of matter-information measure in comparison with traditional matter-energy-space-time? The first part of the Fundamentals of Sociology. Several videos on the theme The Triunity of Matter-Information Measure by Vladimir Mikhailovich Zaznobin, mine, are on the internet. I cannot name the links now, because the links are wandering, but there are videos. Therefore, search, look at the world, try to envision this concept yourself. Everything will work out. With regard to the application of the principle, practice is the criterion of truth. Well, now in front of me is a completely material computer. In it here, the software is a measure. The software grinds the incoming stream of information, resulting in a video file. Nearby on the table is another computer, which does the same thing, maybe in a slightly different system. How is this not proof that the triunity of matter-information measure is really actual? Well, and the fact that from the standpoint of the four-component set of space, time, matter, and something else there, energy and fields, or spirit, well, here is the whole history. And even among the standards, we have two standard lamps. One sets the meter, the other sets the second. Although in principle, one reference lamp would be enough. The number of wavelengths would set a meter, well, and the number of periods of oscillation would set a second. We are proposed to study the conception of social safety and go to power. But I don't think this path is real. Decent people do not strive for power or for the leadership of the CSS. In addition, it is not enough to know something. You need financial and informational resources. You need to enter into some kind of power groupings. See Khazin's latest book. None of which are guided by the CSS, coming together according to different principles. How do you see this path? This path is not for everyone, because this path presupposes the implementation of the principle, subjugating yourself, subjugate others. That is, you enter the system and subjugate yourself to its principles. Then you begin to subjugate the system to yourself. Why is this possible? Because the problems the system is facing are real. If you know the ways of solving problems, you can organize their solution, then your leaders will become interested in you, in your activity. In this case, you occupy a certain informal status. You can influence the course of the process, and in this way, you will somehow make a career. But again, this path is not for everyone. Will the conception of social safety turn into an elite club of intellectuals? An ordinary person who is not thirsty for power is not able to study it in the full measure. Will he who thirsts be accepted? What group is the conception for? A club of intellectuals who do nothing. In our terms, these are people of chatter. This club has already taken shape. It is multifaceted, but its representatives do little in the spheres of activity in which they are engaged. The majority of them take the position, what can I alone do? One in the field is not a warrior. Or they don't possess a sufficient outlook, culture of senses, in order to feel real processes and enter governance towards them. And if we talk about the conception, then it was never intended to seize power. It was initially intended for the realization of one of the objective laws of governance. The object of governance, the system of governance towards the object, must mutually correspond to each other. And if the society is transformed, then the old ways of governing it become impossible. And society generates a new system of power. Therefore, the conception of social safety is intended for everyone who is ready to be morally engaged in personal development and, on this basis, one way or the other, to engage in identifying and resolving the problems of society, assisting in assuring that the life of descendants would be, if not easier, then would enable them to better realize their creative potential. Therefore, the conception is there. If something in it is wrong, then other people will come who will correct, develop what is not in it. It will do its job, because, once again, the future has never been determined by the main statistical mass of the population. The future, in a number of cases, has been determined by small social groups, sometimes simply unique individuals, who resolved socially significant questions, who sowed what was reasoning Dobrius eternal, and in some way it sprouted in subsequent generations, even if they themselves did not see these fruits abiding in these mortal bodies. An analysis of the frequency of publication of analytical notes before and after the death of Vladimir Mikhailovich Zasnobin allows us to conclude that Vladimir Mikhailovich made up a significant, if not the largest, part of the collective of the internal predictor of the USSR. Is there a reverse process, that is the collective of authors replenished with new cadres? How do you see the future of the internal predictor? So, everything that concerns analytics, then all analytics are always fictions and conjectures in the absence of reliable information. If we turn to the historical past, there was a time when the internal predictor of the USSR issued one analytical thematic note and one note from the cycle current moment every month. And besides that, 2 or 3 thick books were published every year. You see, here you are asking a question that fits with the bureaucratic tradition of evaluating scientific activity: the number of publications. By the year 2017, if not even 2015, the conception of social safety covered a very wide range of questions, thematic spectrum. Therefore, the members of the collective of authors have no longer needed such an intensive publication of various kinds of material. If you look, the intensiveness of publications, it has been decreasing in quantitative terms over the past decade. But this does not mean that the members of the collective of authors have been idle. They have worked on other tasks. Then further, this is about how the collective is replenished. It is replenished. It is replenished on the basis that people who are not indifferent find contacts and are drawn into tandem, polytandem modes of activity. He who does not get involved is rejected by the system. If we talk about the future, then we have never set the task of generating something like a Masonic lodge, which would renew the personal composition in the continuity of generations. Because the tasks of the conception of social safety are completely different. And they are already clear from the materials that have been published. In society, everyone should be carriers of the human type of psyche structure. The human type of structure of the psyche opens up the path to being conceptually powerful. Conceptual power, by its essence, is inherently autocratic. It obeys neither the dynastic law of inheritance nor intrasocial elective procedures, because these are completely different processes. These are processes of a noospheric religious character They govern its formation and reproduction. And if society becomes conceptually powerful and homogeneous in the aspect of nraviousness and ethics, then there is no need for an internal predictor to exist in this society, because the whole society in this case is a global predictor. And the understanding in this sense that the internal predictor of the USSR should take power, well, if it corresponded to the conception, it would have taken power long ago. Because if we turn to 1991, 1992, there were a lot of people who were worried about the fate of the country. But they were worried about it in the sense that a leader should come and that they would support this leader in the localities. Therefore, when the first edition of Dead Water was published, all the walkers from the regions could have been given one or several copies, and they could have been told, go to your place, organize a party cell, and forward. But this doesn't correspond to the conception. Although the internal predictor of the USSR is sometimes reproached for not taking this path, but this path does not lead to the right place. The question was rather long, but its essence is this: where are the mechanisms of selection and the usefulness of power for the people? You see, in such a society, which is Russian society, such a mechanism cannot exist in principle, because we have a crowd of intellectual dependents, and this intellectual dependence extends also to the relations towards state power. Because the relations towards state power is like towards the golden fish. The fish can, but does not do what it's obliged to do. You see, there is no situation that power is for the people, but this is not the power of the people. Power for the people is always the power of the people. And in order for the power of the people to be, the people must be sovereign, conceptually powerful. This is the independence of the perception of the world and the independence of the comprehension of the world. That is, everything from the first priority of the generalized means of governance to the sixth priority. Now, if there is a sufficiently numerous stratum in society that masters all of this, then it is the people. It generates power, state power, as a system, as a subculture of governance towards affairs of social as a whole significance on a professional basis. Then there are procedures that allow you to remove from the authorities the unworthy, those who have lost trust, and replace them with more functionally capable and decent people. And furthermore, the mysticism begins to work when the usurpers who have invaded the power will simply die or leave power due to not depending on them circumstances. Because everything that people do as individuals, everything happens in the stream of the psychodynamics of society, and governance towards psychodynamics is only with the human type of structure of the psyche. Then, through egregors, through the noosphere, one can deal with the formation of state power that will ensure the development of society. But it will not fall from the sky. It will be generated by the society itself. And in order for society to give birth to it, each new generation must be more functionally capable than the generation that preceded it. And for this, we need to develop ourselves to bring up children correctly. That is, the formation of a power that works for the development of society is a long process. And it's not solved by the fact that we come to the elections, vote for someone, and after that a happy future comes, in which we can again have cognac with barbecue or barbecue with cognac. It won't work that way. Society now is not even experiencing a crisis. Society is involved in a collapse. There is only one way out of the collapse, only personal development. If you want, on the basis of the terminology of a single apparatus that was proposed by the internal predictor of the USSR, if you want, create another alternative apparatus. But, nonetheless, knowledge is needed, skills are needed, scientific methodological support of state governance is needed. These words in our state power are not known, but they must not only be known, but what stands behind the words must be understood. Therefore, the process is very lengthy. In one of your lectures, you mentioned upbringing of the senses of a child. If I remember correctly, you explained that education at school should be preceded by the formation of a culture of senses of children. How to upbring the ability of sensing in a child? I would like you to dedicate one of your speeches to this theme, or direct where it is possible to read about it. Well, firstly, the genetic program for the development of the organism and psyche. It provides for this by itself. So there is no need to interfere with its development. The main factors that interfere, this is the monoformity of the environment. An apartment, a street, a school, a car, nothing happens, there are no new impressions. A computer appears, a certain gadget, illusions appear. Well, here is just an example. In the days of Windows 98, there was a screensaver that showed floating fish, bubbles popping up, water gurgled through the speakers, a kitten saw swimming fish, jumped on the table, jumped to the monitor, it was scratching, and the fish was not real. That's it. The interest of the kitten in the screensaver disappeared immediately. And our children, stuck to the monitor, live in a world of illusions. So think for yourself whether a 5-year-old child, or even younger, needs some kind of gadget at his own disposal. It may be better to get out into nature, play outdoor games, so that the child really perceives himself and the natural environment, and so that there is a variety of impressions. Well, again, it depends not on me, not on the educational guidelines. Read Liesgaft, everything is written there, however, in the terminology of another era, but you can understand and correlate with life. Watch a video on the theme of holistic movement, restoration of species-specific gracefulness. There is also this. Well, learn to sense yourself, the surrounding reality, to comprehend it yourself. You can't do without it. As you see it, what is the role of our compatriots who live in North America, in Canada in particular? What do I mean by role? What task are we performing in globalization in a Russian way, in Canada, and how is this seen concretely from Russia? Well, first of all, I want to say that our compatriots who left Russia in the dashing 90s, they generated two statistics. Those who left for sausage and consumerism, many died within 20 years. Those who have retained their Russianness in the sense of the ideals of civilizational development, these are mostly alive. Then the only question is how they will bring up their children. Because this is a really serious question. Once a bilingual announcer and columnist, an employee of the Voice of America, said that when she thinks in English, in the English language, such thoughts as money, commerce, commercial efficiency, and so on easily pass through her. But as soon as she switches to thinking in Russian, she sees it as irrelevant. But as relevant, she sees something else, which is higher than money. Now, if this is there, and you follow it, really follow it, you can, including in the mode of subjugating yourself, subjugate others, and exerting an impact on egregorial processes. Then the Russian diasporas, or diasporas that arose in the 90s, and early diasporas, they really create the potential for the implementation of the Russian project of globalization on the basis of the conception of social safety. But those who went for sausage, they really are traitors, and they died. Because from the point of view of the algorithmics of the egregors of Western civilization, they carry alien, dangerous information that must be eliminated. And from the point of view of the egregor of the Russian spirit, they are apostates, whom it makes no sense to protect. Those who left, preserving their Russianness, they remain under the protection of the Russian spirit. And the fact that they are alive and more or less effectively act in that environment is simply an indicator that the algorithmics of the Russian spirit are more life-capable and functionally capable than the algorithmics of Western civilization. Don't you think that your teaching from the point of view of Marxist theory is petty bourgeois, and in the mind of the Bolsheviks, Menshevik? At the given moment of the incomplete sovereignty of Russia, this conception can be used as a state conception, but if circumstances change, the collapse of imperialism, a planetary geocatastrophe, and other methods of governance and understanding are required, then in this case, can a different worldview conception be applied? You see, this is a question demagoguery, because if another worldview conception, then which one? None of those that exist have been able to prevent the global civilizational crisis. If you have pretensions to create a new one, by all means, we will read it with interest, listen with interest. As for what is from the standpoint of Marxism, well, in general, from the standpoint of the conception of social safety, Marxism is a pseudoscience. Moreover, not an erroneous pseudoscience, but a malicious pseudoscience. Again, if you look at what Galushka says, starting with the prehistory of the St. Petersburg Economic Forum, then Stalin, from 1936 to 1953, solicited from the Academy of Sciences a textbook of economic theory. And they brought him demagoguery with quotations from Marxism-Leninism. Both his own and the quotes from Marxism-Leninism, Stalin knew better than the authors of the textbook. Therefore, the economics of innovative development is, in the essence of the matter, the response to Stalin's demand for the creation of a governorially consistent textbook of economic theory. That is, the conception of social safety. This is real Bolshevism. And all the Marxist demagoguery on the theme that this is a petty bourgeois doctrine, this is demagoguery, behind which there is nothing but groundless claims to power. But by force of the fact that the Marxist project is closed, now it is simply a crowd, which is distracted by the ideals of socialism, demagoguery, which does not oblige demagogues to anything, and they do not want to and cannot incarnate into life the ideals of socialism, because they have to study. And studying is much more difficult than pronouncing all sorts of words and blaming others for these or those vices. Again, the conception of social safety, its ideal is the kingdom of God on earth. That is, everyone lives according to Sovest in dialogue with God. From the standpoint of all traditional confessions, the conception of social safety either does not exist or it is Satanism, because it condemns these or those dogmas and commandments of these confessions, these creeds. Do you admit in some cases a return to the dictatorship of the proletariat of laborers instead of the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie? So, the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie does not exist, because there exists a dictatorship of the behind-the-scenes political mafias, for whom the bourgeoisie is one of the instruments for implementing their politics. If we talk about the dictatorship of the proletariat, then the dictatorship of the proletariat is impossible. Because today it's impossible to toil in the workshop, and tomorrow, on a professional basis, engage in state governorial activity. If we talk about the origin of these or those officials of state power, then, in post-Soviet times, Kazakhstan lived under the dictatorship of the proletariat because Nursultan Nazarbayev began his labor activity as a blast furnace keeper. But, nevertheless, in Kazakhstan there is quite normal crypto-colonial capitalism. There has never been any dictatorship of the proletariat, and there will not be, because the dictatorship of the proletariat is impossible. Yes, the dictatorship of this or that party, or this or that mafia in the interests of social development is possible. Yes, it can be called the dictatorship of the proletariat, but in any case, governance is carried out on a professional basis, not by the proletarians. The proletarians are still at the machine in the workshop. The rural proletarians are in the field. Why does the internal predictor of the USSR conduct a detailed analysis of any dross like Ayn Rand, different Vissarions, but ignore the wonderful work of Stephen Covey on the development of human qualities, spiral dynamics, holacracy, and other phenomena in global culture that contribute to the development of the individual and society? Well, first of all, Ayn Rand had the second largest print run after the Bible in the United States. Her works are an authority for many businessmen in Russia. In order to prevent her lunacy from spreading in Russia, we had to conduct the analysis of the works of Ayn Rand. We returned to the theme of Ayn Rand twice. The first time about her works was briefly mentioned back in the 90s, but since the theme did not fade away, we had to write a more detailed note. Atlas shrugged. The same applies to Vissarion, because in reality it was a cult that hindered social development, leading down the wrong path. As for the work of Stephen Covey, all this from our point of view is demonism. We do not consider the achievement of a demonic type of psyche structure to be real development. Why is it impossible to copy the Western algorithms for the upbringing of the elite and the functioning of the administrative apparatus and transfer them to Russian soil? I have a counter question. At school, did you read Young Ignoramus? Do you remember the position of the mother of the ignoramus? Well, then look at what is happening in the West. The mother of the ignoramus instills the conviction that her position does not oblige her to anything. In the West there has long been a saying, noblesse oblige, which is usually translated into Russian as the position obliges, although this is not an entirely accurate translation. And because with our elite in general, nothing obliges to nothing, until such time as a catastrophe comes and they are drowned in the outhouses and simply thrown overboard as unnecessary. Therefore, it is impossible to transfer Western methods of forming the elite to Russian soil, because the position should oblige, and if it does not oblige, then it itself is that which kills. The only question is when, whom, and how. And if we talk about social groups, then the question is when the psychodynamics of society will mature in order to liquidate the next presumptuous elite grouping.